Okay, let's talk about a true spinal emergency, something called Cauda equina syndrome, or CES for short. Now, that name actually means horse's tail in Latin, which is a pretty good description of the bundle of nerves way down at the bottom of your spinal cord. When those nerves get squeezed, it's a huge problem. And when it comes to figuring out if that's what's happening, getting it wrong can lead to absolutely catastrophic, life-changing consequences. The stakes here could not be higher. What might just seem like really bad back pain can, if it's not treated like the emergency it is, spiral into permanent neurological damage. And we're talking about losing control of your bladder and bowel, losing sexual function. It's a condition that can completely change a person's life forever. For decades, doctors have relied on a certain set of rules to spot this emergency. But what do you do when new evidence comes along and just completely flips that old rulebook on its head? Well, that's exactly what's just happened in the UK, and it's led to a brand new playbook for handling this high-stakes diagnosis. So first up, let's really get a handle on just how serious this is. We're not just talking about the impact on patients, but on the entire healthcare system too. This right here lays it all out in pretty stark clinical terms. This isn't just a matter of pain. It's about losing some of the most fundamental functions we all rely on every single day. The medical research is crystal clear. You delay treatment and you risk devastating permanent damage. And this really shows you the cost to the system. A staggering 23% of all litigated claims for spinal surgery in England are about Cauda equina syndrome. That's a huge number, and it tells you there has been a massive ongoing problem with diagnosing this condition correctly and, crucially, quickly. So how did this all change? Well, this massive shift in thinking didn't just come out of nowhere. It was driven by some really powerful new evidence that basically challenged decades of medical tradition. Right? So the old way of doing things was all about looking for these so-called red flags, things a doctor could physically find during an exam. The theory was, if you find these signs, you've confirmed the emergency. But then researchers started asking some pretty tough questions. Like, what if those red flags only show up after the permanent damage is already done? And what if the exam itself just isn't as reliable as everyone thought? And this is what they found. This table is from a major study of almost 1,000 patients, and it looked at what signs and symptoms were actually connected to a confirmed diagnosis on an MRI scan. The results were a total game changer. Sure, things like pain in both legs or absent reflexes, they were linked to compression. But look at what wasn't. The findings from a digital rectal exam. It was a cornerstone of the old assessment, and this study showed it had no relationship to whether the patient actually had CES or not. And here's the official word. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine came out in 2024, and they did not mince words. They made it absolutely clear. The digital rectal exam has no role in diagnosis. The central issue, the only thing that really matters, is getting that patient access to an MRI scan. That is a huge, huge shift in thinking. Okay, so with the old rules pretty much thrown out the window, a new playbook was desperately needed. And in 2023, that's what the UK introduced, a brand new national pathway for anyone with suspected Cauda equina syndrome. And here it is. This whole flowchart, this pathway, it creates a single, unified, evidence-based standard of care. It's designed to get every single clinician, whether you're a local doctor or an ER surgeon, on the exact same page when it comes to handling a patient who might have CES. So what's the big change? What actually pulls the trigger for an emergency referral now? Well, the new guidelines from the UK are very clear. It's not about waiting for those physical red flags to show up anymore. Now, an emergency referral is triggered by the patient's own story. Specifically, any new or worsening symptoms related to their bladder or numbness in the saddle area in the last 2 weeks. And this right here, this is the absolute core principle of the entire new approach. A doctor can do a full physical exam and find nothing, absolutely nothing wrong. But if that patient's story, their own description of their symptoms is concerning, that alone is enough. It demands an emergency referral for a scan. The patient's own experience is now the most important piece of the puzzle. So this huge shift from focusing on physical signs to focusing on the patient's symptoms, it all points to one thing. You have to actually see what's happening to those nerves. And that means one thing and one thing only, an MRI. The new guidelines also set a really ambitious target. An emergency MRI for suspected CES needs to happen ASAP, with a goal of getting it done within 4 hours of the request. Now, that is a massive operational challenge for hospitals. It means you need 24/7 access to MRI scanners and the staff to run them. So, how on earth do they make that 4-hour target even possible? Well, the pathway includes a really clever, streamlined MRI protocol. To screen for CES, you just need one single fast scan. If that scan is clear, you can rule out the emergency really quickly. If it shows a problem, then you go on to take more detailed pictures. It's all about being fast and efficient. And this is what it's all about. This is the smoking gun. You're looking at an MRI that shows exactly what Cauda equina syndrome is. You can see the nerve roots, the horse's tail, being seriously squeezed by a huge disc bulge. This picture is the only definitive way to confirm what's going on and give the green light for emergency surgery. Okay, so let's tie this all together. When you step back, what does this new standard of care really mean for both the doctors on the front lines and for the patients themselves? Honestly, it's a complete paradigm shift. The old way was reactive. It waited for late-stage physical signs, it relied on an exam that we now know doesn't work, and it had a really high bar for even investigating. The new UK pathway is proactive. It acts on a patient's early symptoms, it makes the MRI the one and only tool for diagnosis, and it sets a very, very low bar for getting that emergency scan. And the big takeaway here is actually pretty simple, but it's so powerful. For clinicians, the message is, trust your patient's story. It matters more than anything. And for patients, the message is, your symptoms are the key. What you are feeling, what you are experiencing, that's the most important information there is. Don't ever downplay it. So the UK now has what is, on paper, a world-leading set of guidelines for this truly devastating condition. The science has been done, the new playbook has been written. But the huge critical question that's left is this: can the system actually deliver? Can it provide the 24/7 MRI access that is the absolute foundation of this entire pathway? Because making these incredible guidelines a reality for every single patient, well, that's the challenge that lies ahead.